There are places that seem to change when the sun goes down. A familiar road becomes quieter. The trees along its edges seem to gather closer together, and the darkness beyond the last house feels like a place with its own secrets. Somewhere beyond the circle of lamplight, the old stories tell us there may be a woman who knows those secrets better than anyone. She may stand beside a crossroads with a torch in her hand. She may live alone in a forest where no ordinary traveler would think to wander, or keep a house beyond the boundaries of the human world. She may know the names of herbs, speak with the dead, change her shape, read the future, or understand the strange language of the night. Across centuries and cultures, people have told stories about women like these. Some were goddesses, some sorceresses, some wise women, and some frightening figures who appeared when the ordinary world gave way to something older and less certain. Welcome to the Sleepy Legends channel. If you enjoy wandering through myths, legends, mysteries, and forgotten stories at the end of the day, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have a favorite witch, sorceress, or mysterious woman from mythology, folklore, or legend, tell me about her in the comments, because your suggestions may lead us to another story worth exploring. Tonight, we will meet 9 women whose stories have carried them through the darkness of human imagination. Some were feared, some were revered, some were both, and each of them reveals something about the way people have imagined women who possess knowledge, power, or magic beyond the ordinary. We will begin with one of the oldest figures associated with the night itself. She was a goddess of crossroads and thresholds, a keeper of torches, a companion of the dead, and in later centuries, one of the great figures of witchcraft. Her name was Hecate. And long before she became the familiar queen of witches in modern imagination, she was already a mysterious figure standing at the boundary between one world and another. Long before Hecate became a familiar figure of witchcraft and moonlit magic, she belonged to a much older world. Her earliest roots seem to reach toward Anatolia, in the lands that would later become part of Turkey, where ancient peoples honored powerful goddesses connected with wild places, boundaries, fertility, and the mysterious places where one part of the world seemed to meet another. When the Greeks encountered Hecate, they did not simply erase her older identity and replace it with their own. Instead, they drew her into their growing family of gods and gave her a place within their mythology. She appears in Hesiod's Theogony, one of the oldest surviving works of Greek literature, and there she is already a goddess of remarkable importance. Hesiod describes her as honored by Zeus himself, with influence extending across earth, sea, and sky. This is a very different Hecate from the shadowy witch goddess who would appear in later imagination. She was not originally a minor deity hiding at the edges of Greek religion. She was powerful, respected, and capable of granting blessings to gods and mortals alike. Her connection with boundaries, however, remained important. Hecate was a goddess of places where one thing became another, where a traveler stood between roads, where a doorway separated the safety of a home from the uncertainty outside, and where the familiar world seemed to thin at its edges. Crossroads became particularly sacred to her. Imagine an ancient road after sunset, with 3 paths meeting beneath the darkening sky. A traveler might pause there, unsure which direction to take, while the ordinary sounds of the day gradually faded into the distance. Such a place could feel strangely open, as though several possible futures were waiting together in the darkness. Hecate belonged naturally to such places. She could stand at the meeting of roads, watching travelers make their choices, guarding the boundary between one path and another. Her presence was not necessarily frightening. A crossroads could be a place of uncertainty, but it could also be a place of possibility. Her association with thresholds extended into the home. Images and symbols of Hecate could be placed near doorways, where she might guard the boundary between the private world of the household and everything that waited beyond it. The door was both an entrance and an exit, a simple opening that separated safety from uncertainty. This protective aspect of Hecate is important because later stories would sometimes make her seem almost entirely dark. Yet the older traditions present a more complicated figure. She could protect as well as frighten, guide as well as threaten, and bring blessings as well as consequences. She was also associated with fertility and abundance, with the flourishing of households and the productivity of the earth. These connections remind us that ancient goddesses were rarely confined to a single role. A goddess who guarded the boundaries of a home could also be concerned with the life that continued within those boundaries. In the ancient world, the landscape itself could be sacred. Springs, caves, groves, mountains, and crossroads were not simply scenery surrounding human activity. They could be places where the presence of the divine seemed especially close, where the familiar landscape opened onto something deeper. Hecate belonged to this world of natural thresholds. She was not necessarily distant from ordinary life. Her power could be felt beside a road, near a doorway, at the edge of a settlement, or in a quiet place where several paths came together beneath the stars. And perhaps this is one reason her story has endured so well. Hecate inhabits a very human experience. Everyone eventually reaches a crossroads, even if the roads are not made of stone and earth. Everyone stands before choices that cannot be completely understood in advance, and everyone knows the feeling of leaving one familiar place without yet knowing what waits beyond the next. Over time, however, Hecate's image began to change. The Greeks increasingly associated her with the nighttime world, with magic, with the moon, and with things that belong beyond the ordinary boundaries of daylight. Her torches became especially important. In a dark world without electric lights, a torch was more than a source of illumination. It was a small circle of certainty carried through uncertainty, allowing a traveler to see the next few steps while everything beyond that circle remained hidden. Hecate carrying a torch became a powerful image. She did not necessarily banish the darkness around her. Instead, she moved through it while carrying enough light to reveal the path immediately ahead. This distinction matters. The darkness surrounding Hecate was not simply evil. It was the unknown, the unseen, the part of existence that daylight could not reveal. The night held dreams, spirits, secrets, and possibilities that belonged to another side of experience. As Hecate became increasingly connected with magic, She also became associated with people who practiced forms of magic themselves. In later Greek and Roman traditions, witches and sorceresses could invoke her name, seek her favor, or place offerings at crossroads in the hope of gaining her protection. The goddess and the witch gradually began to occupy neighboring spaces in the imagination. Hecate remained divine, but she became increasingly comfortable in the company of those who dealt with herbs, spells, ghosts, transformations, and hidden knowledge. This was the beginning of a transformation that would continue for centuries. The powerful goddess of crossroads and protection would slowly become one of the most recognizable supernatural women associated with witchcraft. But even as later generations changed her, certain images remained remarkably persistent. The crossroads remained. The torches remained. The keys remained. The knight remained. And somewhere between the ancient goddess who protected a household and the mysterious figure who waited at a crossroads after dark, Hecate became something more than a goddess of any single place or time. She became a guardian of thresholds. To stand at a threshold is to occupy a peculiar position. You are no longer entirely where you were, but you have not yet arrived where you are going. Behind you is the familiar world. Ahead lies something that has not yet revealed itself. Hecate seems perfectly at home in that moment. Her stories ask us to imagine the night not as an empty absence of daylight, but as another kind of landscape. A landscape filled with roads, doorways, shadows, torches, and choices. And when the Greeks looked into that landscape, they found Hecate waiting there, holding her light. In time, another connection would deepen her relationship with the night. Hecate became associated with the restless dead, with spirits that wandered after sunset, and with the mysterious boundary between life and death. This connection brought her even closer to the world of magic. The person who could stand at a crossroads could also stand at the boundary between the living and the dead. The same goddess who guarded a doorway could become a guardian of another, much more mysterious threshold. The ancient imagination often understood these boundaries as places of power. At midnight, at crossroads, at doorways, and at the edges of settlements, the ordinary rules of the world seemed slightly less certain. Hecate belonged to all of these places. And perhaps that is why later generations found her so compelling. She could be frightening without being purely evil, mysterious without being entirely unknowable, and powerful without belonging exclusively to the world of darkness. She was a woman of the threshold, and the threshold is where our journey truly begins. Long before Lilith became the famous figure of later stories, there were older traditions about mysterious female spirits associated with the night. In the ancient Near East, darkness belonged to a different part of existence, a time when dangers were harder to see and when unseen beings might move beyond the protection of the household. Among the words that appear in ancient Mesopotamian traditions are names connected with night spirits and beings associated with wind, wilderness, and dangerous encounters. These traditions do not form one simple story leading directly to the Lilith known today, but over many centuries, ideas about these mysterious beings gathered around related names and helped shape the figure who would eventually become Lilith. The name Lilith is connected with the ancient word Lilitu, while related traditions also include the Lilu and ardent lily. These beings belong to a world in which the boundaries between humans and supernatural forces were not always clearly drawn. The night was a time when those boundaries could become especially uncertain. For people living in the ancient Near East, night brought very real dangers. Darkness made it difficult to see who might be approaching. Illness could arrive without warning, and childbirth carried risks that people could not easily explain. Stories about dangerous spirits could give shape to fears that otherwise had no visible form. Lilith would eventually become connected with many of those fears. She was imagined as a being of the night, a presence who moved beyond the boundaries of ordinary domestic life. Yet the story of Lilith did not remain fixed, because like many figures in folklore, she changed as generations retold her. In some of the earliest traditions, the beings associated with names like Lilitu were not simply one woman with one biography. They belonged to a larger category of supernatural creatures, and the boundaries between different names and traditions could shift over time. The Lilith we recognize today emerged gradually from this much older landscape of night spirits. That gradual transformation is part of what makes her story so fascinating. A figure who began within ancient traditions about dangerous beings of the night would eventually become a named woman with a personality, a history, and a story of her own. Much later, Jewish folklore would give Lilith a far more recognizable form. One of the most famous versions of her story appears in a medieval work known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira. Here Lilith is presented not merely as a night spirit, but as a woman who refuses to accept a position of submission. According to this later story, Lilith was created at the same time as Adam, rather than being formed afterward from him. She therefore regarded herself as his equal, made from the same earth and possessing the same right to her own existence. The story gives her a particular reason for leaving Eden. Lilith refuses to accept Adam's authority over her, and when she realizes that their relationship cannot continue on terms she considers unequal, she chooses to leave rather than surrender her independence. This is a striking transformation of the older night spirit. The dangerous supernatural being has become a woman with a voice, a choice, and a willingness to walk away from a world that does not accept her terms. The story itself is medieval rather than biblical, and that distinction matters. Lilith does not appear in the book of Genesis as Adam's first wife. The familiar story belongs to a much later tradition that gathered older ideas about night spirits into a new narrative. Yet once the story existed, it proved remarkably powerful. Lilith became a figure through whom later generations could explore questions about obedience, independence, desire, danger, and the consequences of refusing the role assigned to you. She was also increasingly associated with the dangers surrounding childbirth and infants. In older traditions, supernatural beings connected with the night were sometimes blamed for illness, miscarriage, or the unexplained death of a child. Such beliefs reflected the fears of people living in a world where these tragedies could happen without any clear explanation. Protective practices developed around those fears. Amulets and inscriptions were used in some Jewish communities, carrying names and symbols intended to protect mothers and children from supernatural harm. Lilith became one of the figures against whom such protections might be directed. The night therefore remained central to her identity. She was not simply a rebellious woman from a story about Eden. She belonged to the hours when people slept, when the household was quiet, and when the imagination could transform ordinary sounds into signs of something approaching from beyond the darkness. There is something almost inevitable about the way her story developed. Every culture has stories about what might be waiting outside the circle of light. Sometimes that presence is a monster. Sometimes it is a spirit. Sometimes it is a goddess. And sometimes it takes the form of a woman who refuses to remain where she has been told she belongs. Over the centuries, Lilith's image continued to change. Medieval traditions portrayed her as dangerous and supernatural, while later writers and artists found new meanings in her story. By the modern era, she had become a symbol of independence for many people, particularly because of the story in which she chooses exile rather than submission. That modern interpretation is very different from the fears that surrounded the earlier night spirits. Yet the transformation itself tells us something important about folklore. A character can survive while her meaning changes completely. The same name that once belonged to a frightening presence in the darkness could later represent freedom, rebellion, self-determination, or the refusal to accept a role imposed by someone else. Lilith therefore belongs to several worlds at once. She is connected to the ancient Near Eastern night spirits, to medieval Jewish folklore, to the stories of Eden, and to modern ideas about independence. Each layer has added something new without completely erasing what came before. And perhaps that is why she remains one of the most recognizable night women in the world. She is not easy to place neatly into the categories of witch, goddess, demon, or mortal woman. She has passed through all of them in the imagination of different generations. Her oldest stories belong to the darkness outside the household. Her later stories bring her into the Garden of Eden, and her modern image carries her even farther, into a world where the woman who leaves is not necessarily punished for leaving. There is something quietly powerful about that image. A woman walking away from the place where she was expected to remain, disappearing into the night, and choosing an uncertain freedom over a life she cannot accept. The darkness closes behind her, and the old stories continue to follow her. Lilith remains there, somewhere beyond the edge of the familiar world, carrying with her all the meanings that generations of storytellers have placed upon her. She is a night spirit, a rebellious woman, a figure of danger, and for many modern readers, a symbol of independence. Perhaps the most enduring part of her story is not any single version of who she was, but the image of a woman standing at the edge of the known world, looking into the darkness and choosing to step beyond the boundary rather than remain where she no longer belongs. Beyond the familiar shores of the Greek world, there was an island that seemed to exist at its own pace. The island was called Cailleach, and its forests, springs, and quiet paths belonged to a woman who had learned to live apart from the world of ordinary people. Her name was Circe. She was the daughter of Helios, the sun god, and the nymph Perseus. Through her family, she belonged to a world of gods, divine beings, and ancient powers, But her story is unusual because she is rarely remembered simply as the daughter of someone more powerful. Circe has her own kind of authority. She knows the properties of plants, the preparation of potions, the movements of the natural world, and the ways in which one thing can be changed into another. Her knowledge is not presented as something she learned from a book or from a formal teacher. It seems to belong to her as naturally as the island itself. Imagine her there in the quiet of Cailleach, gathering leaves and roots while the light moves slowly across the ground. She knows which plants should be crushed, which should be steeped in water, and which should be combined with others. Around her, the island continues its own patient rhythm. This is the world into which Odysseus eventually arrives. His journey has already carried him through storms, strange lands, and encounters with creatures and peoples far removed from his home. His men have been traveling for a long time, and when their ship finally reaches Cailleach, they have no reason to know what waits for them beyond the shore. Circe sees them approaching. She does not need to hurry. She has seen visitors before, and she knows that people who arrive from the outside world often bring the same qualities with them. They are curious. They are uncertain. They want to know what lies beyond the next path, and they often assume that the world will respond to them in familiar ways. Cailleach does not work that way. Odysseus sends some of his men ahead to investigate the island. Eventually, they come to Circe's dwelling, where they find a woman who welcomes them rather than turning them away. She offers them food and drink, but there is something hidden within what she gives them. The men eat and drink, and then Circe raises her wand. In the old story, the transformation begins, and the men who entered her dwelling as human beings become animals. They are turned into swine. It is one of the most famous transformations in Greek mythology, but the image is more complicated than it first appears. Circe does not simply transform them into animals because she enjoys frightening strangers. Her magic reveals something about the men, while also changing their outward forms. The transformation becomes a kind of boundary between the human and the animal worlds. The men remain themselves in some sense, but their appearance has changed, and they can no longer return easily to the lives they knew before. Odysseus is different. He has been warned about what happened to his companions, and when he approaches Circe's dwelling, the god Hermes appears to him. Hermes gives Odysseus a magical plant called moly, telling him that it will protect him from Circe's enchantment. The name of the plant has fascinated readers for centuries. Ancient writers described it as a powerful herb, and later generations have wondered whether the story might preserve a memory of a real plant with unusual properties. But the identity of the mythical moly has never been settled with certainty. Protected by the herb, Odysseus enters Circe's dwelling. She offers him the same drink she gave the others. He accepts it, but when she raises her wand and tries to transform him, the magic does not work. For Circe, this is unexpected. She recognizes that something has changed. The stranger before her has resisted the power that had transformed everyone else, and the balance between them shifts almost immediately. Odysseus draws his sword, but the encounter does not end in violence. Circe understands that she has met someone who cannot be treated like the others, and Odysseus realizes that the woman before him is not simply an enemy to defeat. Instead, the two reach an understanding. Circe restores the transformed men to human form, and the danger that had surrounded the encounter begins to soften. What first looked like a story of enchantment and captivity becomes something much stranger, because Odysseus and Circe do not remain enemies. Odysseus and his men stay on Cailleach for a time. The island becomes a place of rest after the long journey, and Circe becomes more than the sorceress who transformed the sailors. She becomes a host, a guide, and eventually an important source of knowledge for Odysseus. Before he can continue his journey, he must learn where to go next, and Circe tells him that he must travel to the realm of the dead to seek guidance from the prophet Tiresias. Once again, Circe stands at a threshold. She knows how to move between the ordinary world and the world of magic, and now she helps Odysseus prepare to cross another boundary entirely. Her knowledge is not limited to potions and transformations. She understands the pathways that connect the living world with places that ordinary travelers cannot reach. This is one of the qualities that makes Circe so compelling. She is not merely a woman who casts spells. She is a keeper of knowledge. Her island itself becomes an extension of that knowledge. Plants grow there. Animals move through the forests. Springs provide water. The seasons pass. And Circe has learned how to observe what the island offers and work with it rather than simply forcing it to obey her. Her magic therefore feels unusually close to the natural world. She does not summon enormous storms or reshape mountains. Instead, she works with small things: leaves, roots, water, fire, mixtures, words, and gestures become instruments through which change can occur. That makes her particularly interesting as a sorceress. Her power begins with attention. She notices what others overlook. She knows that a plant gathered at one moment may behave differently from the same plant gathered at another. She understands that transformation does not always arrive suddenly. Sometimes it begins with a small change, almost too subtle to notice, and continues until the thing before you is no longer what it was. The story of Circe is therefore filled with transformations, but not all of them involve magic. Odysseus arrives on Cailleach as a traveler desperate to continue his journey. He leaves with new knowledge about the road ahead. Circe begins as a mysterious woman who transforms strangers into animals, but she becomes a companion whose knowledge helps guide a hero through one of the most difficult passages of his entire journey. Even the men she transforms do not remain animals forever. Circe restores them, and they continue their journey with Odysseus. The transformation becomes temporary, a passage rather than a final destination. Perhaps that is why Circe has remained such a fascinating figure for so many centuries. She stands in the imagination between the dangerous witch and the wise woman, between the isolated enchantress and the gracious host. She can be frightening, but she is not simply cruel. She possesses enormous power, but she does not spend every moment demonstrating it. She lives alone, yet she is capable of welcoming strangers. And she knows how to change people, sometimes literally, while also recognizing that people themselves are capable of changing without any magic at all. There is another detail in her story that is easy to overlook. Circe does not leave Cailleach to become part of Odysseus's world. Instead, Odysseus comes to her island, enters her world, learns what she knows, and eventually leaves. The island remains. Circe remains. Her world continues after the hero's departure. That makes her different from many figures in heroic mythology. She is not simply a challenge placed in the path of a male hero so that he can overcome it and move on. She possesses a life and a realm that exists independently of his journey. And perhaps this is why the image of Circe has continued to change with every generation that tells her story. Some have remembered her primarily as the dangerous witch who transformed sailors into pigs. Others have seen her as an enchantress, a healer, a woman of forbidden knowledge, or a solitary figure who created a life beyond the expectations of the world around her. But there is something quieter beneath all of those interpretations. Circe lives on an island where the ordinary rules seem to loosen. She knows the plants beneath her feet. She understands the creatures around her. She recognizes the power hidden inside simple things, and she has learned that transformation can begin almost invisibly. When Odysseus finally leaves Cailleach, the island does not become empty. The leaves continue to move in the wind. Water continues to run through the springs. The animals continue to wander among the trees, and somewhere among the plants, Circe continues her work. The sorceress remains among her herbs and roots, watching the light change across the island. And perhaps in the quietest version of her story, that is where we should leave her, not as a villain or a monster, but as the woman who knew that the world contained more possibilities for transformation than most people could ever imagine. Far to the east of the familiar Greek world lay a land that ancient storytellers imagined as distant, wealthy, and filled with strange knowledge. It was called Cailleach, a kingdom at the eastern edge of the Black Sea, where mountains met forests and rivers carried stories toward the coast. This was the home of Medea. Medea was the daughter of Cailleach, the king of Cailleach, and she belonged to a family in which magic was not treated as something strange or forbidden. It was part of the world around her, woven into the knowledge of plants, rituals, healing, prophecy, and the powers that people believed moved through the natural world. Her sister Cailleach belonged to the same remarkable family, and through them we begin to see that Medea's knowledge was not an isolated gift. She had grown up surrounded by people who understood the world as a place filled with forces that could be observed, interpreted, and sometimes influenced. From the beginning, Medea is different from the ordinary women who appear in Greek heroic stories. She possesses knowledge that men around her do not understand, and she is willing to use that knowledge when the circumstances demand it. Her story truly begins when a stranger arrives in Cailleach. His name is Jason, and he has come seeking the golden fleece. The fleece hangs in a sacred grove, guarded by a dragon that never sleeps. Jason has been sent on a seemingly impossible task, and without help, there is little reason to believe he will succeed. Medea sees him, and something happens that will change the course of both their lives. In the ancient story, the goddess Aphrodite causes Medea to fall in love with Jason. But love in this story is not a simple matter of romance. Jason needs Medea because she possesses knowledge and abilities that can help him survive the trials ahead. Medea knows the land. She knows the plants. She knows the rituals that can protect a person from danger, and she understands the magical forces surrounding her father's kingdom. She agrees to help him. The decision is enormous. By helping Jason, Medea is not simply assisting a traveler. She is betraying her own family and placing herself on the side of a stranger who has come to take something precious from her homeland. Yet she does it anyway. She gives Jason the knowledge he needs to complete his tasks. When he must face impossible challenges, Medea provides the means to survive them. Her knowledge becomes the difference between success and failure. The Golden Fleece is eventually taken, and Jason escapes with Medea. She has crossed a threshold that cannot easily be uncrossed. She has left her homeland, her family, and the world she knew, choosing instead to follow a man who has promised her a future elsewhere. Their journey becomes one of the great adventures of Greek mythology. But Medea's story is not simply the story of a woman who helps a hero win his quest. The deeper we travel into her story, the more complicated she becomes. In some versions, Medea's magic is capable of restoring youth. She knows how to prepare herbs and mixtures with extraordinary effects, and one of the most famous stories tells of an old ram that she transforms into a young one. The story is meant to demonstrate her skill, but it also reveals something about the nature of her power. Medea is a woman who understands transformation. She knows that age, appearance, strength, and even the condition of the body can be changed through knowledge of hidden processes. This is the same kind of fascination we encountered with Circe, but the two women use their knowledge differently. Circe's magic is often quiet and observational, while Medea's magic is more closely tied to action, danger, and desperate choices. Her life with Jason eventually brings her to Corinth. There, the balance between them begins to change. Jason has become ambitious. He wants a secure place in the world, and he wants a position that will give him power and status. Medea, who sacrificed everything to follow him, discovers that the future she imagined may not be the future he intends to give her. Jason decides to marry another woman, the daughter of the king of Corinth. Medea is devastated. The woman who once helped Jason obtain the Golden Fleece is now treated as an obstacle to his future. She has given him her loyalty, her knowledge, and her homeland. She has crossed the world for him, and now he is prepared to leave her behind. This is where Medea's story takes its darkest turn. She is not a passive figure who simply suffers what happens to her. She begins to plan. Her intelligence becomes frightening because it is paired with determination. She understands exactly what she has been denied, and she understands the vulnerabilities of the people who have betrayed her. She sends gifts to Jason's new bride. The gifts appear beautiful and harmless, but they carry Medea's magic within them. The young woman puts them on, and the consequences are catastrophic. The palace erupts into chaos. Medea's revenge does not stop there. The Ancient Tragedy by Euripides takes her story into an even darker place. presenting a woman who chooses an act so terrible that it has haunted audiences for more than 2,000 years. Medea kills her own children. It is one of the most disturbing moments in classical mythology, and it is also one of the reasons her character has remained so difficult to categorize. She is not simply a wicked witch. She is not simply a wronged woman. She is a mother, a foreigner, a lover, a magician, and a person whose anger has moved beyond anything that can be repaired. The tragedy of Medea lies partly in the fact that we can understand the path that brought her to this point without accepting the actions she ultimately takes. She has been betrayed. She has been abandoned. She has lost her home and her place in the world. But her response to that suffering becomes something far more terrible than the suffering itself. This complexity is one reason Euripides' Medea has remained so powerful. The play does not allow us to dismiss her easily. She is intelligent. She is articulate. She understands exactly what is happening around her. She knows that Jason has betrayed her, and she refuses to pretend otherwise. At the same time, the tragedy asks us to look at what happens when intelligence, grief, anger, and magical power become intertwined. Medea eventually escapes Corinth in a chariot drawn by dragons, sent to her by the sun god Helios, her grandfather according to the myth. Even after everything that has happened, she is not captured and brought to justice in the conventional way. She disappears. And once again, the story leaves us with a woman crossing a boundary and entering another world. Medea's story has traveled far beyond the ancient Greek stage. She has become a figure in literature, opera, theater, painting, and modern storytelling. Different generations have seen different things in her. Some have seen a dangerous sorceress. Others have seen a woman destroyed by betrayal. Some have focused on the foreign woman who enters a society that never fully accepts her. Others have focused on the terrible choices she makes when her world collapses. But beneath all of those interpretations is the same unsettling figure. Medea knows things other people do not know. She understands forces other people cannot control. And when the world around her changes, she has the ability to change it in return. Perhaps that is what makes the sorceress so frightening in old stories. Knowledge itself can be dangerous when it is placed in the hands of someone who has nothing left to lose. Yet there is another way to look at Medea. She is also a reminder that women in ancient stories were not always written as helpless figures waiting to be rescued. Some possessed knowledge that heroes needed. Some could alter the outcome of quests. Some could challenge kings and princes, and some could walk away from the world that had tried to contain them. Medea's choices are terrible, but her power is undeniable. And somewhere far from the familiar shores of Greece, in the imagined kingdom of Cailleach, we can still picture the young woman who knew the properties of herbs, understood the old rituals, and watched a stranger arrive from across the sea. She could have remained within the world she knew. Instead, she chose to cross the boundary. And once she crossed it, there was no returning to the woman she had been before. There are some figures in mythology who seem to belong to a particular place, and others who seem to belong to a particular moment. The Morrigan feels different. She seems to belong to the spaces between them, appearing wherever the boundaries between life and death, victory and defeat, human and supernatural become uncertain. She is one of the most mysterious figures in Irish mythology, and her stories connect her with war, fate, sovereignty, prophecy, and death. Yet she is not simply a goddess of battle, because again and again she appears in forms and places that seem far removed from the battlefield. To understand her, it helps to imagine Ireland as the storytellers of the old traditions imagined it. Hills rise beyond fields and forests, rivers move through the landscape, and great herds of cattle represent wealth and power. In this world, the fate of a kingdom can depend upon the land itself, and power belongs not only to warriors, but also to the mysterious forces that seem to govern the land. The Morrigan is closely connected with that older idea of power. She appears in the stories of the Tuatha De Danann, the supernatural people who inhabit much of the mythology of ancient Ireland. She is sometimes presented as a single goddess and sometimes connected with a group of three figures, including Baive, Macha, and Navain. The surviving traditions do not always treat these figures in exactly the same way, and the relationships between them are complicated. But together they create an image of feminine power that is difficult to separate from the landscape, from warfare, and from the fate of kings. The Morrigan is not the sort of figure who waits patiently for events to unfold. She watches, she knows, and sometimes she intervenes. One of the most famous stories involving her concerns a hero named Cailleach. He is one of the great warriors of Irish mythology, famous for his strength, his courage, and the terrible transformation that can overtake him when he enters battle. His stories belong to the Ulster cycle, a collection of tales centered around the heroes and kingdoms of ancient Ireland. Within these stories, Cailleach repeatedly encounters forces that seem larger than any ordinary human struggle, and the Morrigan becomes one of the most important figures connected with his fate. In one story, she approaches him in the form of a young woman and offers him her love. Cailleach rejects her, and the rejection has consequences because the Morrigan tells him that she will oppose him in battle. Yet she does not simply appear as herself. She takes the forms of different animals, using transformation to interfere with the hero's movements and challenge his strength. She becomes an eel in a river, a wolf, and a heifer, each appearance creating another obstacle for the warrior. Cailleach responds to each challenge with his own strength, but the story is not really about a simple contest between a hero and a goddess. The Morrigan is showing him that physical strength is not enough to control the forces surrounding him, because a warrior can defeat an enemy standing directly in front of him without being able to fight something that changes its form and disappears into the landscape. After their encounters, the Morrigan is wounded. She later appears to Cailleach in the form of an old woman milking a cow, and he does not recognize her. She offers him milk, and he accepts it, unknowingly receiving nourishment from the same mysterious being who had challenged him before. The encounter is strangely quiet and almost domestic, with no battlefield, no army, and no obvious sign that anything supernatural is taking place. This is one of the qualities that makes the Morrigan so compelling. She can appear in the middle of ordinary life and remain completely mysterious because she does not need a throne or a temple to possess power. She can stand beside a river, watch a battlefield, appear as an animal, or sit quietly beside a cow. Around her, the supernatural and the ordinary seem to overlap. Her association with ravens is one of the images that has become most strongly connected with her in later retellings. The raven is a fitting creature for a figure associated with battle and prophecy, because ravens are creatures of the aftermath, appearing where something has ended and moving through places where the living world has been changed by death. In Irish tradition, birds and animals can also carry messages, omens, and supernatural meanings. The Morrigan's transformations, therefore, do more than make her frightening. They connect her to the living landscape and make her seem less like a distant deity than a presence moving through the world itself. The same idea appears in her association with cattle. One of the great conflicts in Irish mythology is the Táin Bó Cúailnge, or Tuan Bo Culne, the cattle raid of Culne. The story centers on a conflict over a prized bull and the attempt to seize cattle from another kingdom. Cattle might sound like an unlikely subject for one of the great heroic stories of mythology, but in the world of ancient Ireland, cattle represented wealth, status, food, and power. A battle over cattle could therefore become a battle over the prosperity of an entire kingdom. Who will possess the cattle? Who will control the land? Who will be remembered as victorious? And what happens to a kingdom when its power is challenged? These questions move beneath the surface of the story, and the Morrigan seems to understand them before the people caught inside the conflict fully do. Her power is therefore not merely destructive, it is prophetic. She can see the consequences of actions before the people involved fully understand them, which is one reason her relationship with Cú Chulainn feels so much like a confrontation with fate. He is a hero of extraordinary courage, but even his courage cannot protect him from everything that has been set in motion. The Morrigan seems to know this, appearing before him, around him, and sometimes against him, as though she is reminding him that even the strongest warrior remains part of a larger pattern. There is something almost melancholy about that idea. A hero may be brave enough to face an army, but bravery does not guarantee survival. A king may possess enormous power, but power does not guarantee permanence, and a person may know exactly how to win a battle without knowing what the victory will eventually cost. The Morrigan belongs to that space of uncertainty. She sees the battlefield, but she also sees what comes after. She knows that victory and death can stand only moments apart, and perhaps this is why the raven became such an enduring image of her. A raven can be seen before the battle, watching from a distant branch. It can be seen during the struggle, moving above the field, and it can remain after everyone else has gone. The bird crosses the boundary between one moment and another, just as the Morrigan crosses the boundaries between woman and animal, prophecy and event, life and death. Yet there is another side to her story. The Morrigan is also connected with sovereignty, the ancient idea that legitimate rule is tied to the relationship between a ruler and the land. In many traditional stories, a king is not simply powerful because he has an army. His right to rule is connected with whether the land flourishes under him. A ruler who fails to protect the people, maintain order, or respect the deeper traditions of the land can lose that legitimacy. The Morrigan belongs to this older understanding of power, where the fate of a ruler and the fate of the land are never entirely separate. She can challenge a hero. She can confront a king. She can appear as a woman whose presence forces a person to recognize something they would rather ignore. And sometimes the most frightening thing about her is not what she does, but what she knows. She knows that the future is approaching, and she knows that every battle has consequences. She also knows that even the greatest hero eventually reaches the end of his road. In the stories of Cailleach, that knowledge becomes especially powerful. His final moments are surrounded by omens and strange signs, and the great warrior who once seemed almost impossible to defeat eventually finds himself facing a fate that strength cannot overcome. The Morrigan appears in connection with the aftermath, and when the hero is gone, the world continues. The hills remain. The rivers continue to move. The cattle continue to graze, and the ravens return. This may be one of the deepest qualities of the Morrigan. She belongs not only to the moment of destruction, but to what comes afterward. She reminds us that the world does not end when a hero's story ends. The landscape remains, life continues, and the old stories continue to be told. Somewhere in that landscape, a dark-winged bird rises from the earth and disappears into the evening sky. For a moment, it is impossible to tell whether it is simply a bird, an omen, or the Morrigan herself. And perhaps the old storytellers would have preferred that we never became completely certain. Fairy queens, beautiful, powerful, otherworldly. They are ancient beings with knowledge beyond our own. Stories of these hidden women have fascinated listeners for centuries. As stories of fairy queens traveled across Europe, they gradually blended with new traditions and new literary worlds. Among the most influential of these was the great cycle of Arthurian stories, filled with knights, castles, enchanted objects, and journeys into places where the ordinary rules of the world no longer seem to apply. Within those legends appears Morrigan le Fay. Like the other powerful women we have already encountered, she is difficult to place neatly into a single category, because different storytellers have remembered her as a healer, an enchantress, a ruler, a guardian of hidden knowledge, and sometimes an adversary. Yet one quality remains remarkably consistent. Morrigan le Fay belongs to the world of enchantment. Even her name carries that association. The word fae is connected with ideas of fairies and magical beings, and to medieval audiences, the name itself suggested a woman who possessed knowledge and abilities beyond the ordinary human world. Morrigan le Fay often appears standing between two worlds. She understands mysteries hidden from others, knows pathways unavailable to ordinary travelers, and possesses knowledge acquired through study, wisdom, and long experience. The earliest versions of her story are surprisingly different from some of the darker interpretations that appeared later. In certain medieval texts, Morrigan le Fay is not primarily a villain, but a healer associated with magical arts that can restore health and preserve life. That connection to healing becomes closely linked with Avalon. Avalon occupies a special place within Arthurian tradition because it resembles many of the enchanted realms found in older fairy stories. Like Tir na Nog, it exists beyond ordinary geography, and like the hidden kingdoms beneath Irish fairy hills, it occupies a space that feels both real and otherworldly. Stories often describe Avalon as an island separated from the familiar world by water and mystery. Reaching it requires guidance, destiny, or extraordinary circumstances, and once someone crosses that boundary, the ordinary world seems very far away. The island itself is remembered as a place of beauty and abundance. Medieval descriptions emphasize fertile landscapes, orchards, healing, and an atmosphere removed from the ordinary concerns of human life. Morrigan le Fay became one of Avalon's most important inhabitants. In Geoffrey of Monmouth's Vita Merlini, written during the 12th century, Morrigan appears as the chief of 9 magical sisters who dwell on the Fortunate Isle. She is distinguished by her beauty and by her skill in healing, making this early Morrigan a considerably more benevolent figure than the dangerous enchantress who would emerge in some later Arthurian stories. The image is remarkably peaceful. Beyond the sea lies an island where women possess knowledge that ordinary people do not have. They understand healing, magic, and the mysteries of the natural world, while Morrigan le Fay stands among them as their leader. This version of Morrigan le Fay fits naturally beside the fairy queens we have already encountered. She does not need a castle filled with knights to establish her authority, because her power comes from knowledge and from her connection to an enchanted realm. Avalon itself became one of the great mysterious places of Arthurian legend. Geoffrey of Monmouth's earlier history describes it as the island where Arthur's sword was forged and where the wounded king was carried after the Battle of Camlan in the hope that his wounds could be healed. Later traditions would make the connection between Morrigan le Fay and Arthur even stronger. A quiet boat moves across dark water, carrying a wounded king toward a distant shore. Mist gathers around the island, and the familiar world gradually disappears behind him as Avalon becomes the place where the story of Arthur can continue beyond the boundaries of his earthly kingdom. This became one of the defining images of Arthurian legend. Avalon represents an ending that does not necessarily feel final, because the king has not simply vanished from the story, but has crossed into another world where healing, memory, and possibility remain. Morrigan le Fay belongs naturally within that image. She is one of the women who understands the world beyond the familiar shore. She possesses knowledge that cannot easily be explained by the rules of ordinary society, and her connection with Avalon gives her a place among the supernatural powers surrounding Arthur. As the Arthurian stories continue to develop, however, Morrigan le Fay's character changed. Some writers emphasized her magical abilities. Others focused upon her intelligence, her healing, her influence, or her hidden knowledge, while still others portrayed her as unpredictable or dangerous. The darker Morrigan le Fay gradually became more familiar. She could appear as an adversary of Arthur, a rival within the complicated relationships surrounding his court, or a woman whose magical abilities were directed toward schemes and enchantments. The details change from one story to another, but the underlying fascination remained. She was a woman who possessed power outside the structures of the royal court. That distinction matters. Arthur's world is built around kingship, knights, laws, battles, and loyalty. Morrigan le Fay belongs to another kind of authority, one based upon knowledge, enchantment, transformation, and access to places that the king himself cannot command. She can enter the story from beyond the borders of Arthur's kingdom and then disappear again into the world of magic. This makes her difficult to define as either hero or villain. Different authors emphasize different aspects of her character, and over the centuries she accumulated new layers without losing the sense that something about her remained hidden. That ambiguity is part of her enduring appeal. A knight who defeats an enemy can be understood through the language of courage and battle. A healer who possesses knowledge unavailable to everyone else belongs to a different kind of story, one in which the greatest power may be the ability to understand what others cannot see. Morrigan Le Fay occupies that space. She knows things other people do not know. She sees possibilities others cannot see, and she belongs simultaneously to the world of courts and castles and to the enchanted world beyond them. In this respect, she resembles many of the fairy queens who came before her. Like Queen Mab, she possesses access to unseen realms. Like Titania, she commands authority within an enchanted world. Like the Queen of Elfame, she stands beside mysteries that ordinary travelers can barely perceive. And like Niamh, she is associated with a distant and beautiful otherworld. For this reason, Morrigan Le Fay feels less like a departure from the traditions of fairyland and more like their continuation. The legends surrounding her gathered together themes that had existed for centuries and carried them into a new age of storytelling. There is also an intriguing possibility that the older Celtic traditions may have left traces within the later Arthurian character. Scholars have noticed similarities between the Morrigan and Morrigan Le Fay, particularly in the names and in their associations with supernatural power, but the evidence is complex and the connection remains debated rather than established. That uncertainty is fitting for Morrigan Le Fay. Her story itself is made of layers. One layer belongs to the fairy traditions of enchanted women and hidden kingdoms. Another belongs to medieval Arthurian romance, and another belongs to the later imagination that transformed her from healer into sorceress and sometimes villain. Each generation added something. Each generation also left something behind. And through all those changes, Avalon remained. The island beyond the water. The place where healing was possible. The enchanted realm where Arthur could be carried when the ordinary world could no longer save him. Some versions of the legend imagine Arthur resting within Avalon, healing and waiting for a future age when he might return. Whether the story is understood as literal belief or as a symbolic hope, Avalon remains a place where stories are allowed to remain unfinished. That quality connects it to the other fairy realms we have visited. Fairy kingdoms rarely disappear completely. They fade from ordinary sight, become harder to find, and retreat beyond the boundaries of everyday experience. But they continue to exist within the stories that remember them. Avalon is perhaps one of the clearest examples of this ancient idea. It lies somewhere beyond the familiar horizon, in a place that cannot be completely mapped. Its shores remain hidden behind water and mist, and its mysteries remain just beyond the reach of anyone standing on the ordinary side of the boundary. And somewhere beyond that horizon, Morrigan Le Fay continues her watch over the island. She is healer and enchantress, ruler and mysterious woman of the otherworld, a figure who has changed with the stories but never completely lost her connection to enchantment. The mist moves across the water. The island waits beyond it, and Morrigan Le Fay remains there, where memory, healing, and legend meet beneath the drifting mist. In the Highlands of Scotland, winter has never been only a season. It can feel like a presence, something that arrives across the mountains with the first hard winds, settles over the valleys, and changes the landscape beneath snow and frost. For generations, stories gave that presence a face, and the woman they imagined was the Cailleach, known in our story as Cailleach. She is the queen of winter, the queen of the weather, and sometimes simply the old hag. Unlike some of the women we have encountered tonight, Cailleach does not need to enter the world from somewhere else, because she seems to belong to the mountains themselves. Her stories are found across Scotland and Ireland, and they vary considerably from one place to another. Yet certain qualities return again and again, especially her connection with winter, storms, mountains, wild animals, and the creation of the landscape. Imagine the highlands at the beginning of winter. The days are shortening, the mountains are dark beneath gathering clouds, and the first snow begins to settle on the highest peaks. In the old stories, this is when Cailleach begins to make her presence known. Some traditions say that she brings winter by spreading her great cloak across the land, while others imagine her striking the ground with a powerful staff and freezing everything beneath it. Winter becomes something she can create and control, rather than simply a change in the weather. She is also said to shape the mountains themselves. One story tells that as Cailleach traveled across Scotland, stones fell from the basket she carried, scattering across the land and becoming mountains and hills. Other traditions imagine her deliberately shaping the landscape, using enormous stones as though they were pieces of a world she was still building. This makes the old hag a creator as well as a destroyer. The mountains that seem ancient beyond human understanding become traces of her movements. A rocky peak can be imagined as something she left behind, while a valley becomes part of the path she once traveled. There is something particularly beautiful about this way of seeing the landscape. The mountains are no longer simply geological formations. They become evidence that someone enormous and mysterious once moved through the country, leaving pieces of her world behind. Cailleach is also closely connected with the animals of the Highlands, particularly deer. In some Scottish traditions, she is described as a guardian of wild creatures, especially during the difficult months when winter makes survival more challenging. This gives her character a more complicated quality than the frightening image of the winter hag might suggest. She can be harsh, but she is not simply evil. She represents the forces of nature that can nourish the land in one season and make survival difficult in another. The same winter that brings hunger and hardship can also be part of the natural rhythm that keeps the landscape alive. Her relationship with the changing seasons is often described through her connection with spring. In some traditions, Cailleach's winter reign lasts from Samhain until Beltane, when the warmer half of the year begins. As spring approaches, her power weakens, and the stories describe her retreating or being transformed into stone until winter returns. This gives the year a rhythm that feels almost like a contest between two ancient powers. Winter does not simply end because the calendar says it should. Instead, the old hag gradually loses her strength as the days lengthen, while spring pushes its way into the world around her. There are stories in which she gathers firewood at the beginning of February, preparing herself for a longer winter. If the day is bright, she can gather plenty of wood, and winter may continue. If the weather is dark and stormy, she is unable to gather enough, suggesting that the cold season is finally beginning to lose its strength. These stories transform weather into something almost personal. A sudden storm is no longer simply a storm. It may be Cailleach making one last attempt to hold onto her power, while a warm breeze becomes evidence that spring is beginning to win. Perhaps the most intriguing place connected with her is a tiny stone shelter hidden in Glen Lyon. It is known as Táin Cailleach, the house of the old woman, and inside it are several weathered stones shaped roughly like human figures. Local tradition identifies them with Cailleach, her husband the Bodak, and their children. The stones are small, but the story surrounding them is much larger. According to local tradition, Cailleach and her family once sought shelter in the glen during a storm. The people who lived there gave them refuge, and in return, the mysterious family promised that the valley would remain fertile and prosperous as long as the stones were cared for. The stones therefore became more than representations of supernatural beings. They became guardians of the land itself. Each year, according to the tradition, the stones are brought outside around Beltane and returned to their shelter around Samhain. Their movement marks the changing of the seasons, as though the ancient family leaves the house for the warmer months and returns home when winter approaches. There is something deeply intimate about this ritual. The Queen of Winter, who in other stories is powerful enough to shape mountains and command storms, is represented here by a weathered stone small enough to be carried by human hands. The enormous and the ordinary meet inside this little shelter in the Scottish hills. And perhaps that is one reason the story has endured. The Cailleach is not only a distant goddess standing above the landscape. She can also be found in a small valley, represented by stones that local people have cared for and moved with the seasons. Her presence is therefore woven into the land in several different ways. She is in the mountains that she supposedly shaped. She is in the storms that sweep across the highlands. She is in the deer moving through the winter forests, and she is in the little stone figures waiting inside their shelter in Glen Lyon. There are also darker stories about her. Winter can be frightening when people depend upon the land for food, warmth, and survival. A long winter can destroy crops, isolate communities, and make every journey more difficult. It is easy to understand why a people living close to the land might imagine winter as an old woman who could become angry when the seasons refuse to change. Yet Cailleach is not simply the embodiment of suffering. She is part of a larger cycle. The cold comes. The land rests beneath it. The animals survive. The days slowly lengthen, and eventually winter must give way. That cycle makes the old hag strangely comforting despite her frightening reputation. She may bring storms and frost, but she cannot hold the world in winter forever. Her power has a season, and when that season ends, she must retreat. Perhaps this is why she feels so different from the other night women we have met. Hecate stands at the crossroads between worlds. Lilith lives beyond the boundaries of the household. Circe and Medea possess knowledge that allows them to transform the world around them, while the Morrigan moves between fate, battle, and death. Cailleach does something different. She reminds us that nature itself can be mysterious. The wind does not need a human face to be powerful, yet giving the winter a face allows a story to grow around it. The mountains become her work, the storms become her moods, and the changing seasons become part of an ancient struggle between winter and spring. When spring finally arrives, Cailleach retreats. The snow melts from the mountains. The rivers begin to run more freely. The fields become green again, and the animals move through a landscape that no longer belongs entirely to winter. But the old hag has not disappeared forever. She waits somewhere beyond the warm season, perhaps sleeping beneath a mountain or watching from the edge of the wilderness. When the days begin to shorten again and the first cold winds return, the old stories say that Cailleach will rise once more. The Queen of Winter will return to her mountains, and the land will remember her. There is something particularly unsettling about a story in which a powerful king becomes so desperate that he seeks help from someone he once feared. The story of the Witch of Endor takes us into that uneasy territory, where a ruler who has lost his certainty turns toward forbidden knowledge because he can no longer find answers anywhere else. The woman herself is never given a personal name. She is remembered only by the place where she lived, the town of Endor, and by the strange ability that brought King Saul to her door. By the time Saul seeks her out, his kingdom is in serious danger. The Philistine army has gathered for battle, and Saul looks across the opposing forces without knowing what will happen. He wants guidance, but the people who once served as sources of supernatural knowledge are no longer available to him. The biblical story tells us that Saul had previously removed mediums and spiritists from the land. He had forbidden the practices associated with communicating with the dead, and yet now, faced with the approaching battle, he finds himself wanting exactly the knowledge he had prohibited. This creates the central tension of the story. Saul knows that what he is about to do is forbidden, but fear has become stronger than obedience. He asks his servants to find a woman who can communicate with the dead. Eventually, they tell him about a woman living in Endor who possesses the ability he seeks. Saul disguises himself. The king does not want her to know who he really is, because if she recognized him, she might refuse to help him. So under the cover of darkness, Saul travels toward the woman's home with 2 servants beside him. Imagine the scene. The countryside is dark, and the lights of the battlefield are somewhere beyond the hills. The king of Israel, who should have been surrounded by guards and advisors, is instead moving quietly through the night toward the house of a woman, whose practices he has declared forbidden. When Saul finally reaches her, he asks her to summon a spirit. The woman hesitates. She tells him that Saul has removed the mediums and spiritists from the land and asks why he is trying to trap her. She fears that the request may be a test designed to expose her and bring about her punishment. Saul swears that no harm will come to her. Only then does she agree. She asks whom he wants her to summon. Saul tells her to bring up Samuel. Samuel had been a prophet and an important figure in Saul's earlier life. He had guided the king, challenged him, and eventually rejected him when Saul failed to follow divine instructions. Now Samuel is dead, yet Saul wants to hear from him again. The woman begins her ritual, and the story takes an extraordinary turn. She sees a figure rising and realizes that something has happened that she did not expect. The text describes Samuel appearing, and the woman suddenly understands that the man standing before her is Saul. Her reaction is one of alarm. She cries out when she realizes who has come to her, and Saul reassures her. The disguise has been broken, but the supernatural encounter has already begun. Samuel speaks to Saul, and the message is not comforting. Saul asks what he should do about the Philistines, but Samuel reminds him that the divine presence has turned away from him. The answer Saul receives is essentially the answer he had feared all along. The battle cannot be escaped. Saul and his sons will die. Israel will be defeated. The king has crossed into the realm of forbidden knowledge, and what he discovers there is not a way out of his circumstances, but confirmation of what is already approaching. There is something haunting about that moment. Saul did not seek the Witch of Endor because he was curious. He went because he was afraid, and because the future had become unbearable precisely because he could not see it clearly. The woman of Endor does not promise to change the future. She does not offer Saul a spell that will guarantee victory. She simply helps him ask a question that he is desperate to have answered. And the answer makes the darkness around him seem even deeper. The story is also unusual because the woman herself is not portrayed as a cackling villain. She appears cautious and frightened, aware that the practice she performs could place her in danger. When Saul collapses after hearing Samuel's words, she is the one who encourages him to eat. She prepares food for the exhausted king. The scene becomes unexpectedly human. A man who has just heard that he is going to die sits inside the home of a woman who was supposed to be his enemy. Outside, the night continues while inside, she gives him food and strength enough to continue his journey. The next day, Saul goes to battle. The prophecy is fulfilled. Saul and his sons are killed, and Israel suffers defeat. The Witch of Endor then disappears from the biblical story almost as quickly as she entered it. She has no long biography. We do not learn where she came from or how she acquired her abilities. We do not know whether she considered herself a healer, a diviner, a medium, or something else entirely. We know only that she possessed knowledge that Saul believed he could not obtain anywhere else. That uncertainty has allowed later generations to imagine her in many different ways. She has become one of the most famous women associated with necromancy in Western tradition, even though the biblical account itself is remarkably restrained. The story does not spend much time describing her appearance or explaining her methods. Her power is defined primarily by what Saul believes she can do. And that may be part of what makes her so memorable. She does not need an elaborate origin story. She does not need a magical castle or a collection of enchanted objects. She simply lives in a town called Endor and possesses knowledge that other people fear. Her story also reflects an ancient human fascination with speaking to the dead. When someone dies, the relationship does not necessarily disappear emotionally. People continue to remember them, wonder what they might have said, and sometimes wish for one final conversation. The Witch of Endor represents the dangerous fantasy that perhaps such a conversation might actually be possible. But the story offers no easy comfort. Samuel does not return to reassure Saul. He does not tell him that everything will be fine. Instead, The dead prophet delivers a message that the living king desperately does not want to hear. Perhaps that is the deepest mystery of the story. The woman at Endor is supposed to possess forbidden knowledge, but the knowledge she provides cannot rescue the person who seeks it. Saul can cross the boundary between life and death for a moment, but he cannot cross the boundary between prophecy and fate. He can hear what is coming. He cannot stop it. And so the story leaves us with an image that has survived for centuries. A frightened king sitting in a darkened house. A mysterious woman performing an ancient ritual. A dead prophet rising from beyond the boundary of ordinary life. And outside, the night waiting for morning. The Witch of Endor remains one of the strangest women in the biblical tradition because so little is known about her. She enters the story carrying the reputation of forbidden knowledge, helps a desperate king look beyond the world of the living, and then disappears again into the darkness from which she came. Perhaps that is exactly where she belongs. Not as a villain and not quite as a hero, but as a woman standing at the edge of a mystery that even the king himself cannot understand. A woman who knows how to ask the dead to speak, and who discovers, along with the king, that sometimes the most frightening knowledge is the knowledge of what cannot be changed. The night has grown quieter now. We have traveled through many different worlds to meet these women. Some belong to ancient temples, some to forests and islands, some to the boundaries between the living and the dead, and some seem to rise directly from the landscape around them. We began with Hecate, standing at the crossroads with her torches and keys, watching over the places where one road becomes another. Her power belonged to thresholds, and she reminded us that the unknown does not always have to be feared. Then we entered the much darker traditions surrounding Lilith. Her story traveled across centuries, changing from ancient night spirits into the medieval legend of a woman who refused to accept the place assigned to her. In later generations, that same figure became a symbol of independence and the courage to step beyond a boundary. On the island of Cailleach, we found Circe among her plants and potions, a woman whose knowledge of transformation made her both dangerous and fascinating. She could change the bodies of men, but she could also offer guidance, hospitality, and the knowledge needed to continue a difficult journey. Far away in the imagined kingdom of Cailleach, Medea possessed another kind of power. She understood herbs, rituals, and hidden forces, and her knowledge helped Jason obtain the Golden Fleece. Yet her story also showed us how knowledge and power can become frightening when they are joined with betrayal, grief, and revenge. Then we traveled into the ancient landscape of Ireland, where the Morrigan moved between woman, animal, prophet, and supernatural force. She watched warriors and kings, understood the changing fortunes of battle, and seemed to know what was waiting beyond the moment everyone else was still living through. Morrigan Le Fay carried us into another enchanted world, where Arthurian legend met the older traditions of fairy queens and hidden kingdoms. Beyond the waters of Avalon, she remained connected with healing, magic, hidden knowledge, and the mysterious realm that existed beyond the reach of ordinary kings and knights. In the mountains of Scotland, Cailleach brought us into the deep rhythms of winter. She shaped mountains, carried storms across the landscape, guarded wild creatures, and eventually surrendered her power when spring returned. Her story reminded us that nature itself can become a character in the stories people tell about the world around them. And finally, we travel to the town of Endor, where a frightened king sought forbidden knowledge from a mysterious woman who could call upon the dead. The Witch of Endor did not give Saul the answer he wanted, but she showed us something that appears again and again in these old stories. Knowing the future does not necessarily mean that we have the power to change it. 8 women and 8 very different traditions. Some were goddesses, some were sorceresses, some were healers, some were feared as dangerous supernatural beings, while others became symbols of wisdom, independence, or the mysterious power of the natural world. They do not all belong to the same mythology, and their stories should not be treated as though they were versions of one ancient character. They emerge from different cultures, different centuries, and different ideas about the supernatural. Yet something connects them. Again and again, we found women standing at the boundaries. Hecate stood between roads and worlds. Lilith stood beyond the boundaries of the household. Circe lived on an island separated from ordinary society, while Medea crossed the boundary between her homeland and the foreign world of Jason. The Morrigan moved between human and animal forms and seemed to stand close to the boundary between life and death. Morgan Le Fay belonged to Avalon, a place beyond ordinary geography, while Cailleach belonged to the changing boundary between winter and spring. And the Witch of Endor stood at perhaps the most mysterious boundary of all, the thin line separating the living from the dead. Perhaps this is why stories about witches, sorceresses, and night women have survived for so long. They give a face to things that are difficult to understand. The darkness outside the door, the storm moving across the mountains, the knowledge hidden inside a plant, the uncertainty of the future, the grief that remains after someone dies, the feeling that there might be another world just beyond the one we can see. For thousands of years, people have looked into those mysteries and imagined someone standing there. Sometimes she carries a torch. Sometimes she carries a wand. Sometimes she gathers herbs in a forest, walks alone through the mountains, watches from a crossroads, or waits on a distant island. Sometimes she is frightening. Sometimes she is wise. Sometimes she is both. But she is rarely entirely simple. And perhaps that is the most interesting thing about these stories. The women who live in them are not always meant to fit neatly into categories of good and evil, because the older traditions often understood power itself as something more complicated. Knowledge can heal. Knowledge can harm. Nature can nourish. Nature can destroy. The future can guide us, but it can also frighten us. And the boundary between the ordinary world and the mysterious one is never quite as solid as we might like to believe. The night is still outside. The roads are still there, crossing beneath the stars. The forests are still dark beyond the edge of the light. The mountains still hold their shadows, and somewhere beyond them, the old stories continue. Perhaps Hecate still waits at the crossroads. Perhaps Lilith still walks beyond the edge of the familiar world. Perhaps Circe is still gathering herbs beneath the trees of her distant island, while Morgan Le Fay watches the mist drifting across Avalon. Perhaps Cailleach has already begun preparing for another winter, And somewhere in the darkness beyond the human world, the Morrigan is watching the ravens. These are only stories, of course, but stories have a curious way of staying with us. They cross centuries. They cross oceans. They change languages and names, and they take on new meanings for every generation that tells them. And when night finally comes, they are still there, waiting quietly for someone to listen. Thank you for spending this time with me on the Sleepy Legends channel. If you enjoyed this journey through the stories of witches, sorceresses, and night women, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Sleepy Legends channel. And if there is another mysterious woman from mythology or folklore whose story you would like to hear, leave her name in the comments. Your suggestions help shape the stories we explore here. For now, let the roads grow quiet. Let the forest settle beneath the stars. And wherever you are tonight, I hope you sleep peacefully. Good night.